All right, everyone. Curious Formula here, and we're going to dive right in. I'm not even going to wait to see whoever comes on to this particular stream here. I'm going to set some things. All right. Hopefully, you all can hear me, and hopefully, you are listening. Um, so, the topic today for this particular live is it's called Black Lives Matter: The Assault and the conflation and why all Black lives really don't matter. It's predicated upon this new documentary that Candace Owens has produced and written and made that I just literally finished watching not that long ago. Um, it's called The Greatest Lie Ever Sold. And with that kind of lead intro and title, you know this is pretty provocative. That's a big statement for anyone to make about any organization and about any issue of our day. To call it the greatest lie ever sold uh, is just wrong, and she doesn't really make a point. I'm all good with making the point and making the accusation, but you gotta put some meat on the bones. You have to make a case, counselor, in a court of law, and this will be dismissed uh, without even consideration by a court. So, a couple of things she does and says that are really problematic with this title, and pretty problematic with uh, just the entire recipe and the things that she says. And she makes these statements quite in fact. But let me have make this as a disclaimer first that I agree, interestingly enough, with many things that Candace Owens actually says. I may not like that she is the messenger. I may not like some things about her personally in terms of her beliefs and how she stipulated them, but she does say some things that I think our community, particularly the African American community, need to hear and need to actually discuss and actually have debate about. And so I think it's wrong to just dismiss her hat in hand and say, well, she's a sellout because she works for this organization and purports these types of things. And yeah, is she looking for attention? She is. But most social commentators, particularly in social media, are looking for clicks, are looking for popularity, are are touting half truths and half researched things and selective data points to drive home a narrative that is either one extreme or the other. That's what people want on this mean on in this area and in this particular realm that we call social media. It's harmful when either side does it, the left or the right. And Candace is part of, in many ways, some enlightening comments that should be debated, but also she's a part of the pollution that exists on in this community as well. And so the documentary kind of falls into that a lot. And here's a few things that just kind of stood out in my mind that I said when I watched this. She actually says that, and she hints that George Floyd um, is depicted as a hero. Now, I've never heard anybody who is in this fight, anybody who is looking for justice, anybody who's looking to reform the 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 policing community, law enforcement, and their treatment of particularly people of color in the justice in the criminal system as a hero. I've never heard that before. No one has ever said George Floyd was a hero. He was a victim that was a martyr for what happens to black men and women via an institution systematically. And I think that that's what he is. He is a martyr in the sense and a symbol of a system that has gone awry and has never really been about the protection of people of color in a fundamental way. And if you look at how the institution came about historically, from slavery on, the patty rollers in slavery, and those who used the Fugitive Slave Act to retrieve free slaves from the North and Canada and bringing them back into Southern captivity. It's where the modern policing state comes from. It's pretty clear. It's pretty direct and proximate that that's where it comes from. So to say that people are somehow using the name of George Floyd as a hero and not as a symbol of a system that needs an overhaul fundamentally and at its root is really disingenuous. The other thing that she has said that I take umbrage with is she wants to take a look at the totality of who Derek Chauvin is and was, the officer who was obviously convicted of murdering George Floyd, and she has a problem with him being relegated to a knee on the neck, or as an officer at that particular moment in the heat of passion. But the reality is that she doesn't want that kind of totality of a life for George Floyd or for his family or for the people in that community who have witnessed, seen a number of George Floyd incidents happen. And I think that's interesting to try and want to know all about Derek Chauvin, which I don't have a problem with. Looking at the totality of who he is and what he was, and not just in that moment, but to not do that with George Floyd, or to only look at the negative parts of George Floyd, which he tends to do. He was a man wrestling with some mental issues. He was a man wrestling with substance abuse issues, as are a number of people, not only in the African American community, but in the white community, in the world today. There is an overabundance of drugs and people fighting that fight, and overabundance of mental health issues in our community that go untreated, unsubstantiated, undealt with, in a number of ways. And so I found her outrage. I found her ability in the documentary. I found her ability to give grace and to learn about people's histories to be one-sided. And in that case, that doesn't make her a documentarian that is looking for answers and solutions within the work product that it's in. She also attacked Christy Teigen. Christy Teigen, I guess during the George Floyd riots and rebellion across the country, actually offered online and through social media to bail people out of jail that got arrested during what they call MAGA night, which you can probably determine what that means. And Candace Owens really goes into in-depth attacks about, why would someone do this, and she does it in the framework of a of a businessman who unfortunately lost his business to rioting. His stores were looted to the tune of $400,000 of loss, and he was brought out on social media and attacked and beat up about, sort of, I don't know, being not someone sufficiently apologetic about the movement, and he was hit up by a lot of progressive, politicians and actors and actresses out in Hollywood. And I understand that that is unfortunate. I didn't see any reason why this guy should have been targeted. But what I think was interesting was that Candace actually concentrates on the poor store owner, and God knows hopefully insurance has taken care of all of his losses and he is whole again and has his businesses again. But we never learned what MAGA night actually was. And why was Christy Teigen promising to bail people out of jail that get arrested during MAGA night? Um, I think MAGA night, if you do a little research, was a night that Trump supporters of the former president, were planning on doing some things in and around the country. And there were a number of people who said on this particular night, I'm going to fight back if fascists and fascist supporters come in communities to do something, then we're going to strike back. And Christy Teigen was obviously picking sides and saying, if anyone gets arrested trying to stop MAGA night from happening, I will pay your bail. But we never even learned what MAGA night actually is in the documentary, so we can judge for ourselves whether her offer or the offer of any other star or rich person to help the protesters out actually, was had merit. There was also a criticism of hers about activism. And this is where we're going to get into Black Lives Matter and the organization and criticisms of them. She says that Black Lives Matter, the organization, that raised, as she says, is on the tax filings, raised $80 million to do the work of their mission statement, I assume. And what was interesting to me was more or less that she says that, and I'm reading my notes here, that they spent millions of dollars, 8 to 10 million, if I'm not mistaken, on training activists across the country, protesters, how to do it effectively, all those kinds of things. And I think, you know, that's that's fine. I mean, she actually makes that seem like that's crazy to do when that's essentially what the organization purported to stand for. They would create ways for people to channel their frustrations, their anger, their desire to do something into proactive, productive community organizing, uh, demands from the political structure as it is, and to get results ultimately. In that respect, they're not any different than what Dr. King did with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or what Marion Barry and John Lewis and James Foreman and a number of those folks with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee did, uh, to take young people from college campuses and neighborhoods and train them to be effective change agents in their communities and get things done, to channel negative energy and anger and the desire to smash a system and to make that into let's work towards change that is plausible and doable and gettable and ultimately moves the struggle forward in ways that they had not heretofore been able to do. And so I didn't really understand how that was a bad thing. Now, I will say this: she does raise a lot of questions about Black Lives Matter, the organization, that I think everyone should be watching, and I think they need to be answering. And I haven't heard a lot of answers to it. So I wanted you to understand that while I didn't like a lot of the documentary, I do think Candace Owens hit the nail on the head when she came to talk about the questioning of the spending of that $80 million and where it went to. It's extremely questionable, some of the outlets that they, and there's a lot of things if you look at some of the selective showings of who received dollars. And I will say that what they showed in documentary was very selective, because I did see in there that they did give lots of money to local chapters of Black Lives Matter. That they did, again, as I said, train lots of activists in terms of millions of dollars. And those are things that I had to kind of grasp and take a look at quickly because they were, you know, on the propaganda piece there. The real issue I had though was with Patrice Cullors, and the spending that she did, that was separate and apart from funding local chapters and training of activists. Uh, Candace Owens dictates and kind of really points out how she hired family members, and purchased lots of property. I mean, to the tune of millions of dollars, and gave contracts to family members. She lays out the financial proprieties fairly well. I mean, properties being bought in Canada, um, um, and lots of LGBTQ plus organizations, um, and businesses that her wife, or partner, was either affiliated with or ran. Um, and let me just say, I'm fine with giving dollars to LGBTQ plus organizations that are working in the same vein that Black Lives Matter is working. If these organizations are working to transform policing, to end police brutality, to fight for uh, personal liability of police officers when they commit murder on the job, changing collective bargaining agreements with cities and towns and counties, with police unions to make that happen. If they're looking for fighting for consent decrees and orders from the federal attorney general's office in a number of these towns to reform police, as we did in Newark, New Jersey, when I was a city council person there. Um, I think that's fine. They're aligned in that, but it seemed, at least based on the documentary, these organizations that were given dollars are not that, and even worse, these organizations have not filed tax returns on not only the money they receive from Black Lives Matter, the organization, but also from other organizations. So there's no idea of like even those dollars being given to them and what was done with them. So all in all, the documentary I think falls short on a lot of things, and I think it hits the nail on the head and really exposing a lot of the improprieties that have yet to be answered by members of the Black Lives Matter executive board or board who are over the finances, because $80 million is a lot of money, and uh, it there needs to be a real reckoning as to what those dollars were spent on. But the biggest problem I have with the overall project, right, is simply that the conflation that happened with Candace Owens and people on the right about Black Lives Matter. And so on one hand, I did a video about this a couple of days ago. So on one hand, they're critical of the Black Lives Matter organization. We get that, right? And I think, as I said earlier, there are questions that need to be answered about that. But they conflate that with Black Lives Matter, the rallying cry and spiritual motto of a movement of people who don't have anything to do with that organization, that are out here fighting to change systems of oppression and bring information and education to the community and to the world about that. And that's when I talk to 95% of Black people and allies of Black Lives Matter, the movement, that's what they're talking about. Most of us couldn't tell you 5 people who are part of the organization. I couldn't tell you anything about their website. I couldn't tell you anything about what their focus was, because I have no affiliation to them. I've never given money to them. I've certainly given money to Black Lives Matter movements that are local, and through other organizations doing that work who've been doing it long before George Floyd's tragedy, long before there was a Black Lives Matter organization. But the right conflates the two, so that if you wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, if you have a sign on your lawn saying Black Lives Matter, they go, well, they stole all the money. They have $80 million. They stole all this money, so on and so forth. And I'm going, what are you talking about? I'm not talking about the organization. But the conflating of the two really harms attention to solving the actual institutional and systematic problem that does exist. And I think that's the crime in this. And I think that's where this documentary is going to do further harm, because again, on Fox News and in other places that are even more right wing, that becomes the call, and it gets conflated when we have discussions about this, and we're not talking about the essence of the arguments. We're talking about money to an organization and a group of people who I would think most African Americans have no clue and don't even know about. And I think that's a disservice going forward. What I will also say, though, is that it's so they also the title. Let me just get back to the title. The title of it is Greatest Lie Ever Sold. And I know the point she's trying to make, is Candace Owens is trying to make, is that some kind of way this Black Lives Matter and using George Floyd as the poster person for the movement was just a way for a grift, right? It was just a way for people to make money and do those kinds of things. And the reason why it's so funny is because if you look at who Candace Owens supports and defends and makes arguments ad infinitum to talk about like how they are honest and truthful, this ain't the greatest lie ever sold, and it ain't even the greatest lie that she's ever sold. Here's a few things that I think are much greater and larger lies, right? That the 2020 election was stolen. That's a bigger lie than anything that Black Lives Matter may have done with George Floyd, don't you think? Um, but simply put, because there was no reason to suggest that the 2020 election was stolen, unless you just wanted the Constitution to be abridged and you wanted your person to win. Yeah. Here's another great lie that's greater than Black Lives Matter dealing with George Floyd. That Jesus was white or European. That's a pretty big lie that people have sold and made money off of for, I don't know, a few thousand years. How about this? That more black men are in prison than in college. Yeah, that's a big lie that has been sold to depict black men as something less than, or less capable, less intelligent, less educated, less responsible, less more prone to violence, more prone to crime, more prone to being dysfunctional. And people have made money off of that. So I think that's a great lie that's much bigger than what she purports. And lastly, here's another one I just thought of just off the top of my head. The Civil War was fought for states' rights. Yeah, there's a whole cottage industry in the South. When you look at the Confederacy, that it's predicated on that great lie. When even in their forming documents, the United States Confederation, the states of the Confederacy, lay out that slavery was the reason why they left the Union. So uh, I find that hard to digest and take as well. Uh, so these are much greater lies than what Candace is talking about. But ultimately, and I digress. Ultimately, I think the real issue here is that we can debate Black Lives Matter, the organization, the sentiment. The greater issue here that I want to try to get us to focus on after this live, and there'll be more, we'll have more lives on this, we'll have more videos on this, is that why is it that all Black lives do not matter? And I think it's because I'm of the opinion, I think a lot more African Americans and others are of the opinion that there can be no division between ending state sponsored, taxpayer funded violence against Black people and intra community violence against Black people. And we all know that there's really different reasons and causes for both. The causes and reasons and history behind state sponsored, taxpayer funded violence against Black people is different than what fuels and causes intra-community violence against Black people. And I get that. I don't think anybody would disagree that they're apples and oranges. But the destabilization of our community is being affected by both. And like two wings on a plane, uh, they work in conjunct, and they work together, and they support each other in the destabilization of our community overall. And if we ever are going to be able to do things as a people, grow as a people, um, and take our rightful place in this nation and in this world, we're going to have to deal with them both at the same time and stop making excuses for one and not the other. And we need to be talking about holistic solutions to that. Now, I have a few things that I won't talk about on this one that I've already suggested do videos, and we're going to talk about even more. And I look forward to hearing from some of the people looking into this live or who look at this live later to get their take on it. But ultimately, we are going to have to really do the hard work on that. And I guess my biggest disappointment with Candace Owens is that she really has no moral authority to be a part of the discussion of the solution, ultimately, because she's a part of the problem. You know, challenging one and dismissing the other is no way for us to come with solutions. And while she's a commentator on these things, while she is, clickbait a number of these things, while she is definitely the top African American spokesperson for some of these things, she is never produced or talked about solutions to either problem. She doesn't acknowledge one as a problem, but she also has no solutions for the other problem. And The saddest part about that is she will probably tell you that's not her job. That her job is to talk about these issues, highlight them, spotlight them, call attention to them, call attention to what's not being done, call attention to who the charlatans are dealing with them, and all that sort of good stuff. But at the end of the day, when you wade into these kind of waters and you're trying to get attention about these issues, you you gain a responsibility to be part of the solution, to offer some tangible, workable ideas and thoughts and solutions to the very things that you are really picking at in terms of a scab that you're digging into and making worse, or at the very least, not allowing that wound to heal. You pick up the responsibility by simply addressing it and wading in the water about it. And so, why do I say she's part of the problem? Because in another life, and this is documented, Candace Owens talked about certain things that were done to her, and she sued for them. And so, all throughout the documentary, she talks about, she ties it into a bow that Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, others like him, others like that organization are really just talking and playing victim. She says George Floyd and defenders of George Floyd's life are playing him as a victim. That Black Lives Matter won't answer her questions and talk to her for a documentary because they're playing victim. But Candace Owens, you've played victim before too. And I no more would I have grace for you in your situation, just like I have grace for George Floyd and what ultimately he was killed, but should not be blamed for the problems he was actively trying to fight and solve himself. Or that with Black Lives Matter as an organization may have lots of issues and lots of financial improprieties, but represent an organizing hue and cry of the souls of Black folk and our relationship through history with law enforcement. Um, I would no more question your own cry and playing a victim when you were insulted and attacked verbally by white young people when you were in high school, and even the allegedly the mayor's son of the town you lived in, and you sued and you won your lawsuit with the help of the NAACP locally. And, you know, one of your classmates has gone viral talking about it and saying, she felt like you kind of sold out, but that she wished you had gotten more money in your settlement. I feel the same way. But the same grace that I will allow for you to have had real harm and real hurt, at least in your mind's eye, in your own personal life, you're not willing to extend to others, whole communities, whole families, whole neighborhoods, whole cities and towns and states, um, is disgraceful. And it does indeed disallow and 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 really does not allow you to be invited to the table as those of us who are serious about these kind of thoughts and issues are coming to try to work on real solutions for our own children's sake and the sake of our children's children and the sake of where we live right now and the sake of where we come from. And that is what is the most disheartening portion of it. And so, um, yeah, that and the fact that she works for forces that profit from portraying Black people in a certain way. Uh, Again, the big lie and others. And I just don't see you as an honest broker in this realm. And so while I think there is a role to play to talk about why all Black lives matter and that we don't pay enough attention to saving Black folk from intra-community violence as much as we maybe try to defend Black folk from the violence they get from law enforcement, where our tax dollars go. Certain people should not be saying certain things because they decide to leave the fight, the discussion a long time ago. And that's cool too, because you have a right to do that in America. but it does also mean that you should not commentate unless you bring some solutions to the table, that you should not criticize unless you are willing to be criticized for your past behaviors and your past sort of acting as a victim. And it seems that on social media, we're just besieged with people on zero sum. Either you're this or you're that, and the twixt in between shall never work. You can't be somebody working in the middle looking for solutions to both things. That's looking for common sense and common ground with all people. And that's what's sad. And that's what I'm hoping that this talk and these lives that we do and the videos that we do, to look at this curious formula that is being Black in America, um, the best of and the worst at the same time. I hope that we can continue to discuss. So that's all. Thank you all. Please subscribe. Please like and let your neighbors know. And this is our first time doing a live on YouTube. We're going to do more. We'll do more to advertise it so we can get into a real discussion and get real folks in the chat here. I wanted to test it out to see if we could do it. And we've done it. And we're going to do more of these. We're building it as we fly. But the next few days and the next few weeks and next few months, we're trying to grow our having real discussions and looking at things honestly, not for clickbait, but to try to really hear all sides of an issue and to see if we can find common ground. It's the only thing that's going to save us. And if we don't save ourselves, nobody's coming in a cavalry uniform to do it for us. Peace.